I've been holed up in the
eyes
mansion
and ears.
since
It allows you to
yesterday
see
trying to organize
everything
a
going on in the
containment
city of
response.
New York, and it's
Now that you're
amazing the
here,
way it
let's
unfolds.
lock
Like,
down
I mean,
that
to me,
AO.
that's such a genius idea.
track body
Why
cams
go
and
everywhere when you can just have these little nanobots, these little robots monitoring the city for you, and then respond appropriately? Now, the funny thing about this is that at this point, he actually asks Mary Jane Watson on a date, and he is terrible at going on dates. Like, it's disastrous when he takes her on dates. Like, he tries to yawn and put the arm around her knee. Like, he takes her ballroom dancing. I mean, dinner and dancing is always great. Like, dinner and dancing is always a great way to go on a date. I mean, you have a great meal, you have your conversation, and then you just have fun by going out and dancing somewhere. The problem with where I live in Kentucky is all there is just bars where you go and drink and just get drunk. So any woman that you could pick up at a bar, is probably not a girl that you want to take home. But the fact remains here that he's not really one, Superior Spider-Man's not really one for dinner, like for dancing. I mean, he's one for dinner, but not really for dancing. So it's kind of funny, because what he does is he shifts the mood. And instead of, dancing with Mary Jane Watson, what he does is he actually takes her web slinging. And that's actually a really romantic thing to do. Like, take her web slinging. Remember, she's done this before, but they've never really done it like together in a way like this. The problem is that when he gets her back to her place, he gets shut down in the worst way, because remember, Peter Parker's old girlfriend, Carly Cooper, is friends with Mary Jane Watson, and the two, like, she's basically invited Carly Cooper over to hang out with her when the night is over. And so it's basically like, sorry, Superior Spider-Man, but you gotta go home alone tonight. And that's that sucks. And so the crazy thing about this is that with Peter Parker basically watching the entire event unfold, remember, as a subconscious aspect of his own body, he basically is forced to follow Dr. Octopus, Superior Spider-Man, when Superior Spider-Man says, well, I don't necessarily have to be with Mary Jane Watson. I can just relive all the memories of Peter Parker. And so Peter, as a subconscious thought, has to follow Dr. Octopus as he remembers all the times that Peter and Mary Jane Watson were together, every single intimate moment they ever shared, which is crushing.
Their knowledge is critical.
That's a terrible thing to have to see. But at this point, we kind of switch back over to MJ's, and the reason why is because of the fact that the Vulture has basically sent, some of his henchmen, over towards Mary Jane Watson, more or less ransack the place and wreak all kinds of havoc and things like that. Of course, Mary Jane Watson is taken by, the Vulture's henchmen, and Superior Spider-Man rescues her. But when Superior Spider-Man goes after the Vulture directly, what ends up happening here is the Vulture basically reveals that where he's used different people for his own schemes over the years, that what he's done here is he's actually taken, and he's basically using children. He's using them for his own ends. Now, he's using them in terms of like having them carry out nefarious deeds, rob places and commit crimes and things like that. But he does it by giving them like arcade tokens and stuff, which is kind of funny, but it also strikes a chord in Superior Spider-Man. And the reason why is because of the fact that when he's facing off against the Vulture, that when one of the Vulture's henchmen goes to attack him, he hits the henchman and realizes that is a child. The reason why this is so significant is because Peter Parker, as a subconscious thought, jumps into a memory of Dr. Octopus, and we learn that Dr. Octopus's father was an abusive man. And so it's like Dr. Octopus basically feels like he's becoming his father, abusing children. And so because of that, it strikes a particular chord in Superior Spider-Man, and he loses it. Immediately goes after Toomes, goes after Vulture. The other half of this is also the idea that he's had enough. Now, that's why I say Superior Spider-Man, I think, is more interesting than Peter Parker. Because Peter Parker has fought these guys time and time again, but Peter Parker's philosophy is that's just the nature of being a superhero. The nature of being a superhero is you fight bad guys, the bad guys will get free, you have to subdue them, you put them in jail, they get free, and they go and they do the same thing all over again. That's just the nature of being a superhero. That's the price you pay for keeping the streets clean, while also making sure that you do not fall down the path of being a bad guy. For Superior Spider-Man, it's not that way. He is not nearly as tight-knit as Peter Parker is. He's not nearly as clean as Peter Parker is. He's a lot more dirty here. He basically thrashes. He takes Adrian Toomes, he takes Vulture, throws him into this spotlight designed to basically signal, Spider-Man. It was a terrible idea when it was first introduced, when Superior Spider-Man literally chastised J. Jonah Jameson for doing it. He's like, why would you make a spotlight that would tell everybody where you are so they can come and find you and then like kill you or kidnap you or hold you for ransom? Like, that's a stupid idea. Just like call me if you need me or something like that. It was kind of a funny exchange between the two of them. But he sends Vulture crashing into this thing where he's just kind of cut to ribbons. And Superior Spider-Man does not feel bad about it. With Carly Cooper arriving on the scene, it's him basically saying, this is what I'm about. Like, I've had it up to here with these guys. It's time that they be put away. And so what this does is this transitions over to the next phase, which is really Superior Spider-Man kind of rounding up these loose ends, grabbing these different henchmen of Vulture, rounding them up, having them, thrown to the child services, calling it a day, but also the idea that he's also, dealing with Aunt May. And the reason why is because remember, after her Aunt May's injury, she's still learning to walk and still learning how to use her legs properly, but a cane is going to be a necessity. For Superior Spider-Man, this is ridiculous. She's like, why is she in pain? I'm a genius. I will basically create a device that will hook up to her leg, and then she can control it using her leg, and she can walk just like a normal human being. The issue with this is that Dan Slott does not forget about the idea of villains. Now, the idea of Dan Slott, he never really loses track of villains. For him, it's always like, there has to be a main villain. Now, again, this is not a terrible thing. It's just, for me, I would rather there be a little more emphasis on, Superior Spider-Man, but the great thing is that we're currently 4 issues in. So with 33 issues running, there's all kinds of emphasis on Superior Spider-Man, especially when we get to Animal Colony, which she's a character I absolutely love. I love Animal Colony. She's such a great character. But what we end up doing is we basically pick up with the return of a guy named Massacre. Now, Massacre is a guy named Marcus Lyman, and Marcus Lyman is a guy who basically sustained an injury to his brain and was killed, but he essentially lost all connection to humanity. He doesn't value life, so he's basically like the Punisher if the Punisher were a bad guy. Well, the Punisher is kind of a bad guy, but he's like the Punisher if he were a bad guy in carrying out schemes. And we'll find, you guys will see, what kind of things he gets into. But Massacre basically breaks his way out, of Ravencroft Asylum, and kind of goes in this campaign, and we'll find out exactly what it is that he does. But the introduction of Anna Marconi comes by way of the fact that Superior Spider-Man is really angry because Peter Parker never got his doctorate. He's not actually a doctor. He's just Mr. Peter Parker. And in the mind of Dr. Octopus, he's like, that's ridiculous. Otto Octavius is like, why shouldn't Peter Parker have his doctorate? So the funny thing is, something that I hope you're noticing here is that, like, Dr.
What am I tasting?
Octopus is basically making life better for Peter Parker. He's getting his doctorate. He's going to lay the groundwork for Parker Industries, massive worldwide company. He's basically setting the stage for making Peter Parker's life better in some ways. He's making it rough in others, but he's making it in some ways. But, going into his first class, class with a guy named Professor LeMay, because of the fact that, Superior Spider-Man is kind of mouthing off, the introduction of Anna Marconi comes when she gives Superior Spider-Man a note saying, hey, look, you should come tutor with me, and I'll help you get past this class. Now, switching back over to Massacre, what ends up happening here is, of course, Superior Spider-Man is alerted to what's going on with the idea of Massacre, escape, and so on and so forth, but Massacre is actually holding up a place called Burger Town, and basically ends up shooting the place up, and one of the guys tries to alert the cops. But what Massacre does is he engineers his own escape. Now, this is the cool thing about this, and this is why I say Massacre is a lot like the Punisher. The Punisher can easily be viewed as like just this mindless beast, this guy that just runs around and just shoots stuff up, and that's it. That's why I love Garth Ennis' Punisher Max so much, because it puts so much focus on Punisher as a person. It puts so much focus on him as an individual and what he's capable of. That's one of the reasons why I thought it was so significant. But what ended up happening with the Punisher's character, or what ends up happening with Massacre kind of juxtaposed the two together, is that the Punisher is very, very capable. He's pretty intelligent. He's not genius level, but he's intelligent in terms of military tactics, conventional warfare, that kind of thing. Massacre's very similar to that in the sense that he basically engineers his own escape by taking a woman hostage, but no one knows that he's taken her hostage, no one knows about her. And so because of this, Superior Spider-Man actually goes to the Watcher, not the Watcher, but one of the members of Horizon Labs, and says, look, you developed facial recognition software. I need that so I can install it into my Spider-Bots and have my Spider-Bots scan the city looking for the face of Massacre. Yet another instance where Superior Spider-Man shows to be a lot more resourceful than Peter Parker. And so because of this, what we end up doing is following Massacre when he basically, drops this one off in the middle of the city and then blends in, where he basically says, look, you go that way, maybe I'll follow you. And if I hear you say anything, if I hear you shout out, I'll kill you, or I'll just blend into the city. So basically it's kind of feeding on fear of the idea that this woman may be shot if Massacre's actually listening. And instead, he just kind of wanders off and goes away. And so because of this, what we find out is that the journey of Massacre actually takes him to the place, or to the residence of a woman named Miranda Pullman. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that Miranda Pullman is a CEO of a company called Fizzy Cola. And the idea here of Massacre is to basically just make a whole bunch of money by having Miranda pay him $12 million to walk through the streets of New York, murdering people while wearing her competitor's shirt, basically creating bad press for her competitor. And so it is... it's just basic. It's just money is all it is. It all just comes down to something pretty simple. Now, of course, we end up having, Dr. Octopus send his bots out into the city in order to monitor everything. But this is when we get into Anna Marconi. This is why I love her character so much. So Anna Marconi, when Superior Spider-Man first encounters her, she's a diminutive woman. She's a person of a certain size. And so because of this, she basically says, look, I'm here to tutor you on, Professor LeMay's class in order to help you pass. Now, of course, the funny thing about this is that Superior Spider-Man is like, look, I didn't come over here to be tutored. I came over here to stop sending me your text. And we know this makes sense because we know that he would easily pass LeMay's class. I mean, that's just one of those things where it's like he would easily make it through there, no questions asked. But what ends up happening here is Anna says, no, you're here for a class, I'll go ahead and tutor you. And every tutor, every session that's 60 minutes, that's 1 hour and it's 60 minutes, comes with a home cooked meal. Let me tell you something, man. Like, if a tutor was like, hey, I'll cook you dinner and tutor you, I would be like, okay, like, I'm down. Like, even if she's just telling me stuff I already know, I would be like, I'm down for a free home cooked meal. Like, yeah. Not only that, like, because of the fact that he shows her how intelligent she is, she then comes around and gives him dessert. So he gets a home cooked meal and dessert, only to find out that the food is incredibly good. So I'm just like, wow, what a catch. Like, I would definitely stick with that chick. That's why I love her. She's such a great, interesting, unique character in the realm of what's going on in Superior Spider-Man. And so because of that, when we switch over to Massacre, who's just shooting the place? He's basically just firing bullets and everything and so on and so forth. Superior Spider-Man shows up, but this is when he kind of starts to learn the lessons of Peter Parker. What I mean by this is when Peter Parker first became, really first developed the powers of Spider-Man, the death of Uncle Ben is what led him to become a hero. And I'm sure that nobody else had the same experience that he did. The death of Gwen Stacy taught Peter Parker that he can't be reckless, that he has to pay attention to the things that he's doing, that even if he doesn't mean to, people can die by his own actions. And so because of this, Peter Parker, again, as a subconscious thought in the mind of his own body, is basically, screaming Dr. Octopus, you have to stop this fight. Now, Dr. Octopus gets kind of carried away a little bit, but even then, he begins to learn when other people are being killed while he's still present. He begins to learn what's going on. Now, what he had done is he had basically used his bots and realized that there were individuals who were being held hostage by Massacre. That was part of Massacre's plan, was to have 5 or 6 individuals in the warehouse covered with incendiary devices, and that if Superior Spider-Man showed up, he would detonate those devices and kill them. Now, because of these bots, Superior Spider-Man was able to deactivate these incendiary devices, free those individuals, and so now Massacre has no backup plan. The other half of this is Superior Spider-Man shoots Massacre, shoots him in the shoulder. And so the idea is like, Peter Parker, is this incorporeal thought, this subconscious thought says, look, that's not how we do things. We don't kill people. That's the price we pay for being a hero. We have to let the bad guys go. We have to let them live. We have to let them serve their debt to society, and if they escape, then we have to go track them down. And it's just a really, really cool exchange here because of the fact that Superior Spider-Man has to come to grips with this. He even addresses this. He even says, look, it would be so easy to just kill this guy. That's what creates an interesting case here because, it's like the idea of repeat offenders. If everybody who committed a crime was killed, people would say, well, why would deter people from committing a crime? Well, it's not meant to. It's just to eliminate repeat offenders. A person can't commit a crime again if they're dead. And that's the philosophy that Superior Spider-Man takes here. Like, if this guy goes to prison and he gets out, he'll be a repeat offender. But if I kill him, then the number of crimes goes down by that much. So, why let this guy live? But ultimately, he basically decides and says, I can't do it. Not only that, Massacre more or less is forced to appear. Now, that part of the story is interesting for what it is. It's not wildly relevant. It's kind of a way to bring it to a close. But it's basically Superior Spider-Man saying, there's only one way that this can end. There's only one way that this can come to a close. And all we see is a shot being fired. And so the indication that's given to us here is that with this shot being fired, Superior Spider-Man just killed Massacre. And that's what makes this kind of wild, is because Superior Spider-Man's kind of a murderer now. And that's what makes this so unique, so that's so interesting to me. But ultimately, this whole segment wraps up when he has his bots basically travel over to Pullman and say, look, I know what you did. I know about your secret bank account. I know that you paid Massacre to do what he did. You are the hand behind murder. And so, while we don't necessarily see what happens to her, he says either you can go to the police and tell them what you've done, or you can answer to me and I will kill you. And so that's the interesting thing about this, is because it's Superior Spider-Man basically saying, I will kill if it's necessary. If it means preserving the life of other people, then I will kill him. I will kill them. If it means that I can spare countless other individuals, then I will murder a person. Okay. So getting into Superior Spider-Man Volume 2, this again is where Dan Slott kind of goes through this phase of kind of taking things in steps, taking things in small little portions here and there. Really, when Superior Spider-Man first started, almost at Superior Iron Man, which I really want to cover that story at some point, but when Superior Spider-Man first started, there were a lot of thoughts of people saying, well, Spider-Man's going to come back. Peter Parker is going to come back to normal, he's going to come back to being himself. And he is. I mean, you can't do something like Superior Spider-Man and get rid of Peter Parker forever. He's too intrinsic of a superhero. It'd be like killing off Superman and never bringing him back. Because of that, we knew that Spider-Man was going to come back later on down the line. But in the interim, Dan Slott and Marvel were playing this out with Peter Parker was gone forever. So while we have this subconscious aspect of Peter Parker in the mind of his own body, despite the fact that Dr. Octopus was basically taking control of Peter's body, in the end, what the story is going to do is basically eliminate that entire idea and bring forward the notion that Peter Parker's gone forever. Now, the way this initially picks up is it actually joins us with a guy named Dr. Elias Wortham, who also goes by the name of Cardiac. Now, Cardiac is a guy who dates all the way back to Amazing Spider-Man number 242 in 1990. In truth, it was really just like Elias Wortham. He didn't really become Cardiac until like 2 or 3 issues later, something along those lines. But the idea here was that he was basically a vigilante, but not in the traditional sense. And that's one of the things that made his character interesting. Cardiac was a guy who took the law into his own hands for the benefit of society. And so what he was doing is he was basically fighting against cults. He was fighting against guys like Justin Hammer, different things like that. So he wasn't really like a traditional bad guy or a traditional anti-hero like the Punisher. He was actually doing good things. The idea here, though, is that Elias Wortham is basically taking over the Heart Clinic. Now, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do, really, Spider-Man Big Time going forward, because of the fact that a lot of things that were taking place in Superior Spider-Man referenced the events of Big Time, and some of them even referenced some of the events before, but really Big Time is all we needed, since the bulk of the references really come from Dan Slott's first time taking over the series as a solo guy. But the idea here is that Elias Wortham is basically running this sort of underground hospital. And that's kind of cool because what we end up finding out from the perspective of Elias Wortham, one of the big issues with modern day hospitals is cost. The idea that people go in, they have pre-existing conditions, yada yada yada, and it's really Dan Slott's way of saying this is the biggest problem with society at the moment, is that you have people who need legitimate medical attention, but they're basically knocked down on the donors list because they have existing conditions or because they're just not as high up, somebody registered before them. And it's really just one of these ideas where it is a lot of people need more help than there is help that's actually available. And so because of this, we end up finding out that Elias Wortham has been going through and launching these little attacks where he's basically been stealing supplies from places in order to provide these people with the help they need. But these supplies that are being stolen are supplies that were confiscated from criminals. So it actually kind of begs an interesting question. Is he really doing the wrong thing, or is he doing the right thing, or is he doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons? I'm sorry, is he doing the wrong thing for all the right reasons? And so because of this, again, it kind of throws us in a moral quandary. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Dan Slott's Superior Spider-Man, is it really brings a lot of moral philosophical ideals into the equation. I mean, we talked about that in the last video when Superior Spider-Man killed Massacre. If you kill one man to save 1,000 people, is it the right thing to do? It's good old-fashioned Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill utilitarianism. The sacrifices, or I guess the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But the moral implication here is, at what point does that stop? We saw that with like Superman, for example. Topple the governments of the world so the billions of people who exist can live without the oppression of government. So again, there's a point at which you simply just have to stop. And that's when it comes to the whole philosophy of morality and so on and so forth. It's really the line drawing. Now, of course, because of the actions of Elias, because of his actions, as Cardiac breaking into facilities, so on and so forth, stealing the things that he needs, what this does is it basically applies to the police for New York, investigating, or at least alerting realizing the scene right off the bat, he immediately attacks Elias. Now again, Peter Parker exists as a sort of subconscious thought, and occasionally he can intervene. And what this will actually show us is he can still influence the body and even the mind of Superior Spider-Man. But because of this, Peter Parker's screaming in the background, look, this guy is not a bad guy. He's doing all the right things or all the wrong things for all the right reasons, but he's trying to do good. He's trying to do what he's supposed to. And so because of this, the first indication that we get of Peter Parker being able to influence Superior Spider-Man is when he screams to stop, and as soon as he catches the attention of Superior Spider-Man. Now again, these are disembodied voices. In the mind of Superior Spider-Man, he doesn't know what's going on. All he's hearing is just a voice somewhere telling him to stop. We'll also see here in a little while, Peter Parker will start moving his own hand at different things like that. But again, this is basically just I guess an effect of the two of them fighting one another. But when we end up finding out that Elias is here to basically steal something called the neurologic scanner, which is designed to basically map the human brain, Superior Spider-Man realizes that as Dr. Octopus, he made that device. And so in his mind, Cardiac is stealing something that inherently belongs to Dr. Octopus. Now, this is a funny situation because what this does is it throws into sharp relief the idea that despite the fact that Dr. Octopus took over the body of Peter Parker and is now operating as Spider-Man, he can't quite let his past go. He can't quite let go of the fact that he was a bad guy. He invented. If this was a wholesale real, this was a wholesale idea of Dr. Octopus walking away from the car, he would simply say, well, you don't have it, that's just my past life. But the fact that he feels like it still belongs to him means he simply can't let that go. Now, from here, it is the idea of him trying to figure out what's going on inside of his own mind, and the idea that Peter Parker had basically stayed his hand, despite the fact that Superior Spider-Man was going to kill Cardiac. And so, at this point, it's basically Superior Spider-Man having Cardiac with one of these, little spider trackers so he can track his location, as well as Superior Spider-Man going back and see if he can't figure out what's going on with his own body. Now, what ends up happening here is in the middle of his investigation, he's basically contacted by the Avengers. Now, this is actually kind of a funny situation because it's basically Superior Spider-Man versus the Avengers. And what Dan Slott did with this is he designed this explicitly, or really wrote this explicitly for the purpose to show us how Spider-Man would stack up against the Avengers, because we haven't really had a reason to see a story where he takes on the entirety of the Avengers, because Spider-Man is always been a good guy. He's always been a guy that fought on behalf of the Avengers, but he never really fought against them, at least not as a person who was literally trying to do them harm. And so because of this, the Avengers basically call him in and say, look, we've been watching the things that you've done. You've taken a far heavier hand with villains than you have in the past. You killed Massacre. You almost killed Cardiac. What is going on with him? Now, of course, because of that, they basically want to take him and conduct a full battery of tests. The fear of Superior Spider-Man is the Avengers will figure out what's going on with him. And they'll actually figure out that took over the body of Peter Parker. So, of course, this leads to a skirmish between these members of the Avengers, Superior Spider-Man himself. Now, keep in mind, this is not like a full contingent of the Avengers, but the ones who are here are nothing to laugh at. I mean, you've got Wolverine with his heightened senses, Captain America with his agility, you have Thor, you have Jessica Drew, Spider-Man, and you have some guys here. Of course, Black Widow. Don't want to leave Black Widow out. But what is happening here is we're basically referencing to the idea that Peter Parker, that Superior Spider-Man, I'm so used to saying Peter Parker, that Superior Spider-Man's spider sense makes it almost impossible for the Avengers to take him out. And that's something that I want to kind of talk about here for a second. Really, in my mind, for the longest time, and Sal over at Comic Pop will tell you this, for the longest time, I always thought Peter Parker was just a stupid character. Like, I never liked Spider-Man. I was like, hey, look, he's popular, people like him, whatever, I don't really care. But, after really analyzing him further and going through these stories, and as well written as a lot of these stories are, one of the reasons why Peter Parker, as Spider-Man, and even, Dr. Octopus as Superior Spider-Man, one of the reasons why, he's such a formidable hero is because of the fact that his spider sense is basically the original danger that danger ever happened. And so he's always a step ahead of the person that was fighting. One of the best ways to look at this is that the best offense is a great defense. And so because of this, with Superior Spider-Man having the ability to know attacks that are going to happen before they happen, even if he doesn't know exactly what the attacking person is going to do, it keeps him out of harm's way. And so what this means is he can turn around and routinely stay on the offensive so long as his spider sense is working adequately. Now, of course, in a moment of distraction, when Peter Parker is basically distracting Dr. Octopus, what this does is it grants the Avengers a brief moment of reprieve, which of course we're able to use to essentially topple him. But at this point, Dan Slott kind of makes the Avengers look like buffoons, which is not something that I'm really on par with. I mean, I love the Avengers. I mean, the Avengers are one of my favorite teams, but to make them look like buffoons is not something that I'm that I'm too partial with. But basically what happens is after all these different tests, Captain America says, we've confirmed you're not a Skrull, you're not possessed by, some ghost out in space somewhere, no one's taking control of you or anything like that. But in the moment of analyzing these brain patterns, Dr. Octopus realizes that there's brain patterns that should not be there. Now, he doesn't know that it's Peter Parker. All he knows is his brain, the patterns are not where they're supposed to be. And so because of this, while Natasha Romanoff is having this conversation with Superior Spider-Man, talking about the first time she killed and how, the fact that Superior Spider-Man killed Massacre is going to stick with him whether he knows it or not, Peter Parker takes control of Dr. Octopus's hand while he's kind of idle and basically draws out this little diagram indicating that Dr. Octopus stole the body of Peter Parker. Now, the problem with this is that this is a very basic drawing, and Dan Slott plays it up this way. Dan Slott plays it up to us, so that we look at this and we're like, well, how in the heck is she supposed to know that Dr. Octopus took control of Peter Parker's body? But at the very least, it would send off an indication that there's something legitimately wrong with Spider-Man. And so because of this, Natasha Romanoff, who of course would be able to put two and two together eventually, what this will do is kind of set her, or at least sets the possibility up that she's going to end up on this course, or she's going to start investigating what's actually going on with Peter Parker. Now, switching back over to Cardiac, of course, with Dr. Octopus, Superior Spider-Man Spider-Man using the spider tracker and eventually locating where he's at, the two of them engage in a skirmish once more. But in the middle of this whole fight, basically it leads into this operating room, and this is when Superior Spider-Man begins to realize that the reason why Cardiac is doing this is to save the lives of people. And so the whole crux of this was that despite the fact that he had taken this scanner from, that had previously been built by Dr. Octopus, Cardiac did not know how to use it in its entirety. And so what this does is it basically sets the stage for Dan Slott to continue Superior Spider-Man down the role of being a good guy when he looks at this and says, well, I'm the one who designed this machine. I know how it works better than anybody else. I can literally help fix this girl, and I can turn around and perform the surgery myself. And things like that. And while this does allow him to get a little bit of the upper hand, it is Dan Slott saying a little bit, hey, look, the most important thing that we have in life are friends and family. But the other half of this equation is that Dr. Octopus himself is not without his own friends. Now, when I say friends of Dr. Octopus, when I say family of Dr. Octopus, I use that term loosely. These various villains that Ock has fought beside over the course of the years, I wouldn't really consider to be like legitimate friends or legitimate family, not by any stretch of the imagination. They're the closest thing. Not only that, all these guys are formidable in their own right. So in truth, it comes down to a pretty significant battle between the two of them, but in the end, Dr. Octopus ends up winning out. Now, the reason why this case is twofold. The first is that it is people with superpowers going against individuals without superpowers. This is also Dan Slott offering a meta commentary that the people fighting on behalf of Peter Parker are only as strong as Peter Parker is for himself. That is to say, they're a reflection of the faith that Peter Parker has in himself. Only if he's a strong individual, only if he legitimately believes that he should be Spider-Man, do these individuals combat Dr. Octopus. But in the end, he doesn't think that he deserves to be Spider-Man. And the reason why is because of a conversation between the two of them. As this fight starts to break down, and it just turns into Superior Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus makes a perfectly good was in the process of getting ready to perform the surgery on that. Peter Parker did not want him to do it because of his handshake. And the reason why was because Peter Parker did not believe that Dr. Octopus would have the skill to save this young girl's life. What Dr. Octopus says here is, you were willing to let this girl die in order to get your body back. You were willing to sacrifice an innocent in order to defeat me. Octopus making the case that what Peter Parker did was tantamount to Dr. Octopus holding someone hostage and then Peter Parker shooting the hostage in order to kill Dr. Octopus. That's the case that's being made here. And because of that, in face of that, Peter Parker has a total breakdown. He says, oh my God, you're right. I was willing to sacrifice the life of an innocent young girl in order to make sure that you were defeated, that you were stopped. The other half of this is Dr. Octopus says, look, I was trying to do the right thing. So not only were you willing to put an innocent in danger, you were going to stop me from doing something good. You were going to become a bad guy because you didn't like what it was that I was doing. You didn't trust me. And so because of this, Dr. Octopus basically initiates this mind wipe. Peter Parker has no more defense, really nothing to put up against this. And so all these different memories of Peter Parker start getting wiped away. And what this does is it sets the next stage, the next phase of the story, which is simply Dr. Octopus in the body of Peter Parker without having to worry about his essence or his memories causing any kind of problems for him in the foreseeable future. Okay, so continuing on with Superior Spider-Man, we're officially into the story without Peter Parker. And it's actually kind of cool here. I mean, Peter Parker's cool and everything, but the idea of doing a story where Dr. Octopus takes over the body of Peter Parker is something that I'd like to see focused on strictly as him without influencing people. And Dan Slott gives us that. I mean, this is actually Independence Day, because he's basically free of the control of Peter Parker, at least the influence of Peter Parker. Now, the cool thing about this is that Dan Slott is on stage for everything in all new, all different, amazing Spider-Man. Because remember, you have Superior Spider-Man, the whole run, 33 issues, you got Spider-Man. But Spider-Verse isn't really necessary. It's kind of a cool story, but it's not really necessary by any standard of measurement. It's almost completely and totally self-contained. And then you have two stories from Amazing Spider-Man, and then all your different Marvel happens. So it's pretty cool in terms of how all this is likely into the current run of Amazing Spider-Man and Dan Slott, clone conspiracy and all that kind of good stuff. But what this does is it shows us how streamlined Doc Ock has made Spider-Man's life. Remember, he's got all these little spider eyes that are walking around. Well, because of that, they literally keep an eye on New York and tell him everything that's happening. And so when he wakes up in the morning, he gets daily briefings on what's happening, what villains are fighting one another, which ones are worth their attention and which ones aren't. Now, the funny thing about this is Doc Ock talks about how how in this circumstance, Peter Parker would have just thrown on the Spider-Man costume and would have just jumped into the fray. Because of this, he says, I'm not going to take that role. Instead, I'm going to let them deplete their ranks. I'm going to let them fight each other to the
Suspending
point that they
Expo for
can't
now,
fight
Alpha.
anymore, and
You're
I'm
on
going to
your
go
own.
in and I'm going to take things over. It's classic Napoleon protocol. That's really what it is. Countries start civil wars when they're at their weakest. Parker is the smartest way to conduct yourself in terms of taking over a hostile entity, and that's exactly what he does here. He's like, look, if I want to beat these guys, I could go in and just fight them. But if I did, it would just be a waste of time. What I can do is just let them keep fighting each other until the point that their forces are to the point of exhaustion. When that happens, I'll go in and just take everybody over, and that's exactly what happens, exactly what he does. He goes in and of course attacks like Owlman, and a handful of others. But the other thing that I want to point out here is how strong Spider-Man is. When I was going through Spider-Man number 700, we were going through Dying Wish and Suicide Run and all those stories that led up to Superior Spider-Man. One of the things that I wanted to hold off on talking about was the idea of how strong Spider-Man is. Now, Sal over at Comic Pop has done several videos on my channel in the description where we run over Spider-Man stuff, and Sal is one of the foremost knowledgeable people about Spider-Man that I've ever known. It's literally his way. It's crazy how knowledgeable he is about Spider-Man. But, historically speaking, there's been reference to the Peter Parker pulling his but in the Spider-Man, was confirmed that. And that's the significance of those kind of things. It's one of these things that said, really powerful. It's a matter for other characters to say, yes, they are really powerful. To confirm that it's really the character gives a little more substance. Now, again, this is whatever the writer wanted to be, and so the document is talking about Superior Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, number the question of the drop so hard that he knocked his and knocks away and feel like he basically the entire time. Now, the reason why that was significant is because what it means is going forward in the stories before as part of Superior Spider-Man is that Doc Ock had to recognize how easy it would be for him to kill foes. That's one of the first things that Peter Parker sort of realized in the Ultimate Universe. It's the first thing he realized to his detriment when he killed a person. So because of this, it's really kind of cool to see it all unfold. But again, one of the other things going on behind the scenes here is the return of Norman Osborn, really as the Green Goblin. Now keep in mind, Norman Osborn has and always will be a Spider-Man. A lot of really promotion. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. I haven't been able to find any but I don't know anything going on behind the scenes in terms of whether or not this was all designed. The whole story was all designed to bolster the reputation of Norman Osborn so that when Goblin Nation, then it would be a lot more interesting. I don't really know if that's the case or not. The only thing I can guess here is that because of the fact that Norman Osborn is essentially going to defend himself as the Goblin Nation, as I guess really as part of the lead up to Goblin Nation, then it was just really part of a scheme. But again,
That's fucking like tasty.
and they just said, you know what, we're going to revamp Norman Osborn, and we're going to make him the Goblin King instead of the Green Goblin. But the fact remains that since he got over with Goblin, again, a lot of this deals with him and his personal relationship. But it's actually fun watching him talk to people because of the fact that he usually just talks down to them. And it's not fun to talk down to people, but it's funny in terms of how he does it, in the sense that he's talking to the professor, the professor for his thesis, and he talks to him, like he literally finishes his test, takes it over, hands it in, and says, don't bother worrying about it, I aced the whole thing. You don't have to check it, but you can if you want. But if you did, you'd just be wasting your time. So it's funny to kind of see him interacting that way. But again, with regards to Goblin King bolstering his ranks, he's basically grabbing all these different individuals, these different henchmen, part of these small-time criminals or just petty thieves or what have you, and having them operate as part of his scheme in order to essentially try to take over New York. Now again, a lot of this is leading up to Goblin Nation, so this is these pages here and there, where some small things happen in regards to the Green Goblins. But what ends up happening here is some of these goblins attack Mary Jane Watson's nightclub. This whole attack coincides with dinner that Spider-Man is having with Anna Maria. Now remember, Anna Maria is part of All New, All Different Marvel. She's a woman of a diminutive size, but she's also really interesting. And the reason why is because with her being as intelligent as she is, she doesn't really cook using conventional methods. And in fact, what she's doing is she's making a carbonated sorbet using dry ice. But it's really cool because they're has been streamlined. The fire department showing up at Mary Jane Watson's business came by way of Superior Spider-Man because of the fact that he's aware of everything that's been going on with the city. In his mind, he was arguing, well, why not have my own life and keep the city safe? And that's exactly what he did. When the attack happened, when the fire broke out, he basically had the fire department notified and they responded. Now, of course, the bigger question to ask here is what would Peter Parker have done? And Peter Parker would have arrived, he would have left Anna Maria, he would have arrived on the scene. And the reason why is because he wouldn't know whether or not people were going to die in the fire. And that's one of the issues with regards to Superior Spider-Man in terms of how he views himself as Spider-Man. I mean, it's no secret by now, he's a much darker character. And because of his willingness to kill, something that we'll actually see yet again here in this story, in his mind, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So sure, one person might die in that fire, but if 7 people are saved, well, then that's just the way it goes. And so again, it's kind of a darker road to take for his character, but it's one of the reasons that I kind of find a little refreshing here. I mean, Peter Parker Spider-Man is the Spider-Man, it'll always be that way. But for me, Dr. Octopus and Superior Spider-Man makes it a little more interesting, makes it a little more